Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. It's always particularly exciting whenever we're able to actually gather in a place and celebrate the launch of a new book, and it is particularly exciting when it is a debut collection of poetry. So thank you all. Oh yes, you can applaud if you'd like. Please feel free to applaud it with me. But we are here tonight to celebrate the launch of this wonderful new collection, Sun Compass, the first collection of poetry by Brigette DePape. Now we'll be hearing from Brigette in just a moment. We'll also be hearing from your host for the evening. But first, just a few very exciting housekeeping rules, and then I'll be, or notes rather, and then I'll be calling up somebody to say a few words as well. So while we're in this space, we just ask that all of you remain masked, please. Those people who come up here and stand behind a microphone will remove their masks if they so wish for audibility. But then once we move to the signing outside, masks will just be recommended, but not obligatory, although we do recommend them. So thank you very much for bearing with us on that point. In addition, there'll be some readings, there'll be a conversation up here, and following that, there'll be an opportunity for all of you to ask questions. Rather than have everybody share the same microphone, all we'll ask is that you please tell me the question, which I'll then relate into the microphone, and this also ensures that everybody watching it at home can hear the question. As I cannot possibly do justice to the inevitable eloquence of your questions, I'll just ask that you do keep them relatively short and actual questions, as you will have ample opportunity to express all of your excitement and pleasure to Brigette when you meet her at the signing table after the event. If you are watching on YouTube as well, you will also be able to join in the conversation. Please feel free to write any questions you might have in the chat, or if you have any positive comments, feel free to write those in there too, as the chat will be replayable. That is more than enough for me for right now. I'll be back with some exciting signing procedural notes and also to be introducing tonight's guests. But first, I'd like to invite up somebody with whom this book would not exist. And that is, of course, Matt Jodry, who is the publisher at At Press, the people who brought this book into the world. Please join me in welcoming him.
Take off my mask here. Okay, well, thanks, John, and always thanks to McNally Robinson for supporting the arts. This is such an amazing place, and we're so lucky to have a shop. I guess you could call it a shop. It's more than a shop, but we're so lucky to have them here and be able to meet like this and talk about the arts, and especially poetry. Often one of the more overlooked literary arts, and we're so lucky to have that here. I don't know about it being us as the creators of this work. Certainly not. I see this work as creation by Brigette and a long, hard journey. That's how I see this book. This book took a little longer than usual to see fruition and to see it into completion. And part of that is sometimes books evolve and they move and shift and they become something a little different than what they were at the beginning. And this is one of those books. And I think that's also a testament to the text that you'll find inside the book, because that text, and you know, Brigette and Mercy will talk about this, I'm sure, but the text is meant to create evolution and thought and discussion and moving forward from something. And this book has that in all its beauty. And in addition to that, what I really love about this book is that it's a spare text. And that's something that I find to be these days a little bit rare in poetry. That's just me. But I'm so fortunate to have been a part of this book. To have worked with Brigette and to also to have worked with the artist, Chief Ladybird, who did the beautiful cover artwork. These things have a lot of moving parts and a lot of people involved in them, and we were just so thrilled to be one of them. So without further ado, I just want to congratulate Brigette on a beautiful book. And now I'm going to be quiet and let somebody else take it away. But thank you so much for coming and supporting the book. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Matt. I now have the pleasure of introducing both of tonight's participants. First, I'll say a few quick words about the book Sun Compass, a text that resonates and creates an impactful presence as the poet unpacks past trauma. Divided into 4 parts, this collection delves into the magic of resilience and finding one's way through past pains. The poet's words harness both shadow and light, the contrast creating new directions and perspectives. Brigette DePape is a Winnipeg-based writer. When she was 11, she received a wonderful gift, a journal from her big sister. This led to her love of writing. She studied creative writing at the University of Ottawa. She has written 3 plays for fringe festivals across Canada. Her work explores the themes of healing, sustainability, joy, and love, all of which you'll find within these pages. She is happy to call Winnipeg home. Your host for this evening, Mercy Oluwafemi, has delivered leadership programs around the world and has spoken at TEDx. She currently works at the Winnipeg Foundation, connecting youths to philanthropy and the nonprofit sector. She is also Vice President of Athena Leadership, an organization dedicated to fostering women in leadership. Mercy is an avid reader, and perhaps her biggest claim to fame is once having read over 450 books in a single year. Please join me in welcoming Brigette DePape and Mercy Oluwafemi.
Hi, everyone. I am so thrilled to see you all here this evening. I am so grateful, and it just warms my heart to see each and every one of you. I want to say a huge thank you to John from McNally for organizing this event. I want to say a huge thank you to publisher Matt, as well as Alana, who really believed in this book and saw the potential in this book. I'm so grateful, and thank you so much for your hard work in making this book a reality. I'm so grateful to Mercy for facilitating our conversation this evening. It's been so meaningful to do this together, to practice together. You're such a dynamic and warm facilitator and a trusted friend, so thank you so much. And just so you know, I'm going to say some thank yous, and then I'm going to read, and then we're going to do a bit of a facilitated conversation. I want to say a huge thank you to Sarah Enns, who did such an amazing job editing this collection. It was such a joy to work with you. The book wouldn't have happened without you. You connected me with @Babe Press, and you really saw these threads in the book that I didn't see, and made it a cohesive book. So thank you so much. I also want to thank the incredible artist, Chief Ladybird, who created this cover art. And most of all, I want to say thank you to all of you for joining today. Everyone who's joining online, as well as all of you for joining this evening. I want to thank my warm and wonderful family, my partner Kari, our baby, who maybe you can see here. It's really exciting to be here together, the two of us, like presenting. Also to my sisters, my parents-in-law, my nephews, my brother-in-law, and to my dear friends. I'm so grateful for you for being there during, challenging times and in the celebration as well. So this book is really all about finding home, and you're really my community and my home. So I want to say thank you. As much as this book is a celebration of love, and this launch is a celebration of this book. It's also a celebration of you. Okay, so I'm going to do a few readings. I knew I might forget someone. I was worried that I might forget someone. And I'd like to blame pregnancy brain for forgetfulness. But I was actually reminded by my mom that I've always been a little bit forgetful. But yeah, I would like to also thank the great writers who provided the recommendations on the back cover, Catherine, Rebecca, and Carmen, who are all great writers. All right, so I'm going to start with a poem that was from the Winnipeg Free Press writing series, Rites of Spring. Show me your mom tattoo. I want to see under your socks. I am pedaling so hard, but I don't know where I'm going, what direction is north. I forgot my mittens, but it's your fault if I lose you. I feel your ribs when we're together, and they feel like I need you. A mountain that I climb and I don't want to stop. But so what if I know how to play the tambourine in your band with your cousin? You don't know what bells are. You think tigers and tiger lilies are the same thing. You weren't there when the grass stopped growing, when my elbow broke, and so did my bed. And so did the plane, and so did the sun. When my skirt ripped, when my freckles fell off. He ran my red, crashed my light. Which way is home? Can't find you, North Star. He takes her fear in his hands, wraps it around her face like a scarf. Muted, she can't hear her own heart telling her to run. If he calls you vanilla, when you tell him you like being held, not spanked, you like being asked, not told, let him know that vanilla is derived from orchids, harvested from their beans. So when he calls you vanilla, know you are an orchid. Rises in the east, sets in the west. The sun shows us which way is north. But what about today, when the sun couldn't get out of bed? I picked up sacred stones at my preferred perch, the wild bird specialty and gift store. Poppy jasper for assertiveness, hematite for protection, aquamarine for courage, stones to give me strength to leave him. He is gone, but I still have a velvet pouch full of magic powers. At night, he visits my thoughts, and I want to text him good night, But instead, I text it to the moon. The moon is my sister who, after the breakup, kindly offered to be mine. Thank you very much. That's the first part. Now I'm so thrilled to welcome my dear friend Mercy for our conversation. All right.
Awesome. I feel like you've thanked everyone in terms of making this book, but I do want to say thank you. Thank you for producing this. Thank you for writing such an amazing collection of poems. And I know some of you have read this. When I read this the first time, I was crying because of how impactful it is. I'm really glad that this is something that a lot of you and a lot of the world will get to see. So I think this is, when I first picked up the book, a question that really stood up to me, and I'm sure a lot of you can probably relate to that, is sun compass. Why sun compass? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your warmth. And I feel like sun compass is really the core of the book. So I feel like the idea of the sun compass is that it's a navigational tool that's used by butterflies and birds to help them find their way. And it's an internal compass that they have that uses the light of the sun to direct them. And I love that idea. And for me in this book, it means, you know, after trauma or after a big challenge, we sometimes feel like we've lost our way, we don't know where we are. And the idea of the sun compass is reconnecting with ourselves, with our community, in order to find our way and to be guided by that sense of warm energy.
That's amazing. So Max talked a little bit about this when he was given the work earlier on, just around the different journeys the book took. And it seemed like it started in a different way at the beginning, sort of has an ending now. What were some of the inspiration that happened for you as a poet over the course of that journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like it has evolved a lot, you know, since that first try of the book. And I feel like a big part of the evolution was in healing and, you know, in reading and in writing. That felt really healing to me. And I really wanted to share a message of healing with others and support them in their healing journeys. That was really kind of the intention behind the book. But I think while I was doing that, while I was actually writing the book, it kind of helped me to be the author of my own story. And that was really empowering and cool, and maybe something I wasn't expecting when I first started writing. And it felt really healing for me. And I do think that writing is a really powerful tool for healing. And I do think you'll also see a lot of my family in the book, and a lot of my friends in the book, and the poems. They've inspired the poems. Like I think a lot of the imagery that is flowers, for example, comes from my mom, who's a gardener, and, you know, my dad, who's a bird watcher. There's a lot of bird imagery in there, bicycle imagery as well. And I also think, you know, some of the poems throughout are about friends who, you know, helped me throughout this process. And then a lot of the poems at the end are about my partner, Kari, and, you know, the gift of finding love.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of intimacy is really coming across, like intimacy with yourself, intimacy with friends, intimacy with your family, and of course, Carrie and you, baby, which we're going to talk about in a bit. So that's amazing. So who are you as a poet? You know, I'm trying to picture, what does Brigette look like when she's in this space where she's trying to write a book, where she's trying to put down different poems? Who are you? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like one of the as a poet, I think I'm very inspired by other poets. And, for example, Rupi Kaur, I absolutely love her work, and I feel so influenced by her work, like, reading like Milk and Honey, Homebody, The Sun and Her Flowers, like reading all of those texts, I feel like really like influenced the book, helped me to find like the ideas to express, some of the challenges, but also some of the healing, which has been really beautiful. And I'm really excited that she is coming to Winnipeg in November. So that will be awesome. Yeah, and I feel like a sense of community with other poets and poet friends. So that's a really cool feeling. I do remember like loving writing and poetry ever since I was little, and I think that at first kind of was expressed through plays, but it was also expressed through poems. I just never shared them with anyone, or I did. Yeah, I don't know if anyone remembers LiveJournal, but that was like before Instagram, before Facebook. I would write these like really cryptic poems, and that was really fun. And then it's been fun to kind of see the writing evolve, like as I evolve.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I think a lot of writers can probably relate to that, just writing involves you as a person involved. I don't think, it makes sense as a human being for you to be stagnant and for whatever you produce to be stagnant. So it's such a growth to see that whatever you're producing, the writing and what you're writing down is coming from where you're going as an individual. So when I picked up this book, a lot of message stood out to me, but I'm curious, from you who created it, what are some of the messages that you wanted to pass across to people? Because we've talked about finding love, losing trust, finding a new way home, intimacy, trauma is such a big aspect of the book. But what were some of the specific messages that you're really hoping that whoever picks up Sound Compass will be able to get?
That's a great question. So I feel like there's 3 themes or messages that I'm really hoping to get across with the book. And the first one is really about consent. I think that with the book, one of the main messages is if we feel that we're in a situation or relationship that is abusive or unhealthy, to really trust our intuition in that situation and to trust our intuition when it tells us to leave. And that's a really important learning that I feel like is a main message in the book. I think too, it was something hard to write about, but I do think that sexual assault is part of this book. And, it's pretty staggering when you think about the prevalence of that, the fact that 30% of women in Canada have experienced sexual assault. 1 in 6 men have experienced sexual assault or abuse, and there's also a really high proportion of non-binary people who experience that. It's even a higher proportion for young people, for Indigenous people, BIPOC, for people who have differing abilities, people who are low income, LGBTQ2S. And so it's prevalent, but I also think a main message of the book is the importance of awareness of that in order to prevent it, and also of healing and the importance of education around consent and around what a respectful relationship looks like, because we don't always find that in like our mainstream society, and it's so important to also represent healthy love. Yeah.
So it seems like a bit of your heart as an activist is coming across here, where you're trying to
that's really true.
Send that message across the world.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And I do think that one of the messages too is about healing and how we can heal after experiencing trauma. And that's really powerful, because I think when you're in it, you might not remember that. And it's really important to remember that we can heal. Everyone's healing journey is going to be different. And, I hope with the book, it just shows, some of the tools that can be used for healing. And I also really hope that one of the messages that comes through is about nature and, you know, how beautiful nature is and the resilience of nature, how that can remind us how resilient we are. You know, when we see the image of a butterfly, you know, migrating home using the sun, that's hopeful. Or when we see the image of the prairie crocus that has bloomed after this long, hard winter.
I feel like one of the messages that really stood out to me was what you just talked about around nature. And because we've just had such a long and hard winter, picking up this book now feels a little bit more relatable because it's like summer is coming, it's gonna get warm, it's hopeful. So I feel like having this right now, just there's a little bit of magic to that maybe if we had it in November or December might have been different. That's just my opinion anyways. But you know, the beginning of the book, or the first couple parts of the book, was around that trauma, that, you know, the deep dark stuff. And then later on was around hope, finding love, finding home again. And I know you had a couple readings just around that little bits of parts in terms of finding hope. Would you like to read it to us?
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. My toenail fell off yesterday like a leaf from a tree, and underneath, like magic, an indented, misshapen nail, a crocus revealed by snowmelt. That's a really cool thing that happens with toenails that I didn't know. Thank you, universe, for forgiveness, for reclamation, for holding me gently in the palm of your hand, like a hot bath, with pillar candles and rupee core, then wrapping me not too tightly in your blue sky towel. All right, this is a second bell poem. Thank you, Mercy, for your recommendation to use bells again.
They were just fun. I was enjoying it. So.
When I woke up, I was myself. How refreshing. Sometimes when I wake up, I am a lynx afraid of my power, my own teeth. Or a bellflower, scared you'll step on me, crush my petals. But today, when I woke up, I was my biggest and smallest self and entirely enough. And thank you so much to Sarah. This is a poem that I'm really grateful is in the collection, and I feel like it's one of the most important poems in the collection because it's really about changing the narrative from being a victim to being the author of your own story. He preyed on me, but I am not his prey. I am a prayer, not the kind you mumble against your will kneeling, the kind you sing, toes tapping, hips shaking, smiling and laughing. I am a prayer to that electric, exalted, rise up kind of love. This poem is co-authored by my sister Noelle, who is a wonderful writer, and these are from the word art magnets on her fridge. I catch dandelion wisps, clutch the tiny fluffs in my hand, then send them back to the grass, like blowing a kiss to the earth. Fly, little seed, like a blossom with no winter. I feel like that totally resonates right now after winter too. Why is it so hard to tell you the one thing I am so certain about? Marigold, I love you. Gardeners know the importance of deadheading. Sometimes it's my own big head that stops me from growing.
I feel like I can listen to you read all day.
Oh my gosh, that's so
You have such a calming voice, but also just, all of your demeanor as well. So it's made for reading. Thank you so much. I wanted to pick on just the last one you read there around deadheading. I call it cutting off the head. And for me, I'm very interested in emotions and the fact, vulnerability and being able to recognize when something isn't working for you. So that was something that really stood out for me. How do you recognize when you need to deadhead or cut off the head, as we say, and when you need to make room for new growth? Because I think that's a hard skill.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think with deadheading, that is a really good question. And I didn't know about deadheading until my mom showed me with the flowers. I had these red geraniums and they were starting to wilt. And she said, oh, you need to actually cut off the head in order for the new flower to grow. And so that was a real learning moment. But sometimes I think for me, that can mean, if you find yourself in a relationship or in a situation that is unsafe or that is, abusive, that recognizing that it's time to kind of cut off that tie. And I think that can be really, really hard. But I also think that can then make space for new love, and that's really beautiful and important. So I think it's a hard thing to recognize deadheading. But then I also think it has to do kind of like the poem is also about ego and like, you know, sometimes having ego being the thing that's stopping you or stopping me from growing, and knowing that, you know, sometimes there's certain parts of ourselves that we hold on to so tightly because we think, oh, that's part of my identity. This is part of who I am. But then it's sort of coming to that realization that, oh, maybe this is not serving me, this part of who I am, or this narrative that I have in my mind. And actually, I would be better off to, you know, let that flower's head be cut off. And, you know, even if it feels like you have, you know, no head and you don't know where you're going and it's scary, it makes space for what's next and for that blossom to grow.
I love how we can oftentimes find similarities between gardening and life, and you know, animals trying to find their way home, and creating space for that. But I think that's such a really important aspect of human beings, just in general, being able to recognize when something isn't working for you and making that hard decision to like cut it off and find space and make space for new roads. I think that's such a really key aspects that you as a poet, you've been able to recognize. One thing, another, I think, really big, strong component of the book is vulnerability. Even the idea of sharing a book with the world, like that's big in terms of being vulnerable, and the type of content in terms of what you're sharing as well really speaks to vulnerability. How have you been able to, you know, be okay with that a little bit of uncomfortable feeling that comes with vulnerability? And also, you know, you've gone through a lot, you've gone through trauma, you've gone through the dark stuff. How have you been able to be okay with that?
That's a great question, and I really appreciate you raising the point about vulnerability and our conversations about this. I feel like it is so important to be vulnerable, and I feel like that is reflected in some of the poems. Like, for example, the poem where it talks about the reason that we have thorns is to protect us so that we can grow soft petals. And to me, there's something there about assertiveness, learning to be assertive, you know, so that you're not so aggressive that, you know, you're eating others alive, but you're not so passive that you're being eaten alive, and trying to find that sort of balance. And I also think that part of vulnerability is being able to be vulnerable helps us to grow, and to be able to share our feelings helps us to grow. But I also think it's so important that that's done like in the context of a safe relationship, you know?
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, I've heard the sort of quotes around healing sometimes happen in safe spaces and safe relationships, and being able to like go and find spaces like that.
Exactly, yes, yeah.
That's awesome, thank you. So shifting gears a little bit, the cover of the book, when I picked that up, I just think like sun and bright and hope. So you really wanted to work with Chief Ladybird, who's the designer for the cover, on that specific artwork, which I think it just represents a little bit more of what's inside the book in terms of the roses dying and then rising up again, the leaves that are withering but coming up and being strong. Why was that so important to you to work specifically with Chief Ladybird, and what does the art cover say for you?
Yeah, I love how you described the cover, and I feel like it was really awesome to get the chance to work with Chief Ladybird. She had illustrated the cover of a friend's book, and that's kind of what introduced me to her work. And then I started following her on Instagram, and I was just so moved by her work. Like, I really encourage you to check it out. It's so vibrant and it's so strong. It has this message of resilience. And I feel like that really comes across in the illustration of the sunflower, in the sense of, you know, you see the sort of regrowth after the sunflower has, you know, either experienced a hard winter, gone into hibernation, or, you know, has wilted and its seeds are regrowing and rebirth. And I also think it's really beautiful that you see the roots in this beautiful drawing as well, and the importance of roots in terms of the ability for that flower to be able to grow. So yeah, it was really awesome to get the chance to work with her. I do feel too that Indigenous knowledge is a really big part of my healing, and as someone who's a settler and who works a lot with Indigenous communities and colleagues and friends, it was so important that also be reflected in some of the poems. And I think about some concepts, like in terms of the life cycle and medicine wheel, for example, and how grateful I am to have been taught some of those things. And I really feel like that was so critical in my own healing. And I also feel that Indigenous knowledge and wisdom is so important in the healing of the earth, in the context of climate change.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. You talked a lot about, healing and the journey of that. Writing, it also sounds like it's been such a big part of healing and finding home. How have you been able to rebuild trust, like through all of that? Because coming from the parts where the leaves are dead and down to coming up strong and being really beautiful, that's such a journey. Like, how have you been able to rebuild trust with people that you are with friends, your family, yourself? Because I think that's also really important.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I feel like trust is a really important kind of theme throughout the book, like sort of that loss of trust and then like reconnecting with the self and community to kind of like rebuild trust. And to me, that's so central to healing. I do think about, one of the poems that talks about how like hope is a muscle. And to me, there's something that's really challenging about, going through that pain. But then there's also a hopefulness about, strengthening ourselves through movement. And I think, hope is a muscle, and it's something that when you're in despair, you completely forget about that, or I have completely forgotten about that. But then, I think that when we practice it, and even when I think about movement and strength training, and to me, there's a lot of hope in movement, like in moving through your feelings, moving your feelings from inside to outside, moving in terms of moving your body, reconnecting with your body. That's also kind of a theme throughout. And also, social movements. To me, there's so much hope in like our collective knowledge shifting and evolving and getting better, and I find that really hopeful.
Speaking of hope, as we just wrap things up here, what does hope feel like for you now? Are you feeling hopeful? You're welcoming the new baby into the world in the next few months, and I'm sure that's such a big sort of source of joy. But are you feeling hopeful in general?
Yeah, I definitely feel hope, and I'm super excited to bring a little one into the world, and we're really excited to be here together. I think that, I also feel excited about the idea of becoming a parent and, sharing any sort of life experiences and learnings that I've had from those life experiences with children and kind of with the next generation, with the hopes that, they can learn from some of those experiences, and that they can know what love looks like and what a healthy relationships look like. And I'm really excited and hopeful about that.
Yeah, so it's not just a message for the generation now, it's the generation that is coming up as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, we are going to round up the conversation on that very hopeful note, but I know Bray has one last poem just to read to us, just around hope, and I think it's such a way to like encapsulate all what we've talked about today, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers.
Awesome, thank you. And I just want to say a huge thank you, Mercy, for being so intuitive and kind in facilitating this conversation. So grateful. All right, this is the last poem. And I want to thank you all so much for your warmth and for holding this space. I'm so grateful. Mom says there is hope because 5 butterflies have come to her garden. Monarch on pink coneflower, black swallowtail on lilac bush, red admiral on milkweed, white admiral on willow tree, fritillary on yellow daffodil. They survived hibernation, and after a long migration, came home.
So we're going to open it up to questions and answers right now. And just as John had mentioned at the beginning, we'll come around. If you just want to raise up your hand, come around with the mic and get your questions. Does anyone have any question?
We actually have a question to start from the internet, if you were so inclined. Alyssa was saying, I love what you say about healing and movement. How do you connect with your body through your writing? Or how do you keep that balance between mind and body?
That's a great question. Yeah, there are quite a few poems about running. Like I have some memories of running in the hills in Bosnia, and that's reflected in one of the poems. And to me, running and movement is a way to kind of move through feelings. And sometimes it's only through movement that I actually can come to be a little bit more aware of how I'm feeling. And we've experienced that too, I think, through running. And I think it's such a powerful way to understand what we're going through and process what we're going through and sweat out some of what we're going through. But also I think that there's a really interesting connection between like movement and writing. And sometimes I sort of see like movement as writing in a sense, because you're working through things in your mind, even if you're not writing them down. That's often when I'll do a lot of my writing, is after like, an intense run or after like dancing, is, writing down what sort of occurred in my body and in my emotions. So I think that movement and writing are both powerful healing tools, and they kind of work together.
Were there any questions from the audience?
Hey, Brigette, I don't know if you know it, but right in behind you, over there, is the gardening section. Your book has a lot of references to that gardening. I don't know if that was set up or not.
This was someone from the audience pointing out the proximity of the gardening section.
I love it, thank you, Dad.
I'm really fascinated by the art, the discovering art and colors and all that. And like, would you give direction or context to the word where she did, or she just sort of was inspired to draw that?
This is a question about the art and color associated with the cover art by Chief Lady Bird. Just asking how much direction was given or if there was any.
Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you so much, Tony. I think that one of the directions or, asks from Chief Lady Bird was to create an illustration for the cover, and ideally something that sort of symbolized the book. And I did share the book with her. And then, I offered a few ideas, something like a flower or a butterfly to, represent kind of resilience. And then it was really up to her to kind of create the illustration based on that. And I'm so grateful for what she created. I think it's absolutely beautiful and hopeful. Hi, Raquel.
Do you think that it's possible to get a poem, and would you rather someone got your poem or interpreted it for themselves?
Do you think it's possible to get a poem? Or would you prefer that somebody reads your poem and interprets it for themselves?
That's a really good question. I feel like ultimately I hope that the book resonates with people and is helpful for them in whatever way that is. So I feel like I personally would be okay if someone read the poem and had a very different interpretation, but it was helpful for them. Because I think that that's kind of part of writing and reading and that's interesting, is like having a conversation, because like each person comes to that poem with their own unique life experiences, and they may interpret it in a very different way. And then I came to it with my own life experiences. And then I think what's exciting is when you kind of have an exchange about what the poem meant to you.
I'm just wondering what your favorite poem in the book is and why.
What is your favorite poem in the book and why?
Thank you, sister. That's a great question. Well, I want to, like, I love the poem that's co-written with you. Of course. Yeah, I definitely love that poem. And I do really love the poem about the prayer and the pray. He prayed on me and I in prayer. I just feel really like that shifts the narrative, and that shifted the narrative for me. And to me, that really like represented that evolution from like sort of victimhood to being the author of your story and imagining what your fate is and writing your own fate. And that's why I really love that poem. And I feel like it's kind of a crux of the book. Yeah, it's a good question.
So knowing that you process by writing, can we expect some poetry about motherhood soon?
And knowing that you process by writing, can we expect some poetry about motherhood soon?
That's a great question. Thank you, Tessa. I would say that I have been working on writing and processing a lot about, growing a human and how interesting that experience is, and how exciting it is too. And I've been writing a lot about climate and climate solutions through work. And I think that I'm hoping to, have a second book one day. I'm not exactly sure what sort of shape it will take, like whether it be poetry or nonfiction. I'm not really sure, but definitely I feel inspired by this process of becoming a parent. And I know that that's something that we talked about too, in terms of like, whether there'll be a book out. But I'd also ask that of my friends who are writers. If you're planning on writing a book, can we expect a book from you?
I feel like that was very subtle. But not subtle.
Oh, yes.
Is there a poem to write that was influenced you the most? And if so, how?
Is there a poet or writer who has influenced you the most? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I feel like Rupi Kaur has been a huge inspiration for this book, especially kind of the evolution of the book. And I'm super grateful for her influence. I just love her style, the way it's very clear and it's very heartfelt. So that definitely inspired me. I'm also very inspired by my friends who are poets, like Sarah, Carrie, having friends who have written poetry books. I feel like that's really inspiring for me. And, I remember when I was younger, I absolutely just love short poems. I love like the work of William Carlos Williams, short, clear poems, I think are really resonate with me.
And we are just approaching the top of the hour. Is there a dramatic final question? Yes.
What were some hardships for your writing and how did you overcome?
What were some hardships you experienced while writing, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question, like in terms of the process of writing itself. Yeah, so I would say that, you know, I think that I evolved as I was writing the book. And so like I had put out kind of a manuscript initially, and then it didn't really resonate as much as I kind of grew. And so I think that one of the challenges was just around ensuring that the book kind of reflected how I was feeling and what I was going through. And, you know, I think a big part of the book is really about like the hardship of, you know, a relationship or an unhealthy relationship. And so I think that that really kind of drove a lot of the beginning of the book. But then I think that a lot of that was it kind of changed and evolved and became more about, you know, finding new love. So that was really meaningful. And I think, you know, it was important just to kind of be patient, to keep working at it, to trust, you know, in the process. And that really helped.
Thank you so much. Now, do you folks have any final words before we move on to the signing?
Yes, I second that. Let's get autographs. I mean, I'm gonna say thank you. Brigette has said a lot of thank yous today, but thank you everyone for coming and for showing up and for sharing your time and energy and space with us today. And most especially with Brigette for sharing this book with us and with the world. And I'm sure, I know, not just I'm sure, I know that your baby would be very delighted to read what our mom has written. So thank you so much. And it's been wonderful to sort of host this space. And yeah, let's get some autographs.
Thank you both so much. I'll now ask you folks to just remain in place for one moment just while we move Brigette over to the signing table. That's immediately beside our cash desk, so feel free to wander over there and get a copy of the book signed. We have copies at our cash desk, so you can wander up there if you need a copy. There are also copies on the table. Feel free to get one signed before you pay for it, but just please do remember to pay for the book at some point tonight. Otherwise, I'd just like to thank Brigette DePape, who has disappeared off into the distance already, Matt, and all the good folks at At Press, and of course, Mercy Oluwafemi for her incredibly insightful and just beautiful hosting this evening. Thank you all so very much for joining us here and virtually. Have a wonderful night, everyone.